Welcome again, everybody. Thanks for joining us on today's podcast. We're in week number 6 in our gospel series, and we're talking specifically last week, this week, and probably next week on the gospel of power, how the gospel is relevant to our life today, how it has the power to fix what's broken in our life. Now, we're going to go back over to Romans chapter 1, verses 16 and 17, and look at our key note verses of Scripture here that I think we're becoming very familiar with right now. But Romans chapter 1, verse 16 and 17 says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith." That's good news for us right there. In fact, the gospel is news that's almost too good to be true. And notice that, again, it says that the gospel of Christ, when it is believed, it has, or it becomes, the power of God is activated in our life for salvation. Now, we've already looked at that word salvation there in the Greek. Again, sozo, soteria are the words, the verb and the noun used for save and salvation. But it's also translated many other times as healed, as restored, as make whole or make well. And again, that definition for those Greek words sozo and salvation, soteria, carry with them the full definition of save and salvation. To save, it means to save, to deliver, to keep safe and sound, to rescue from danger or destruction, to save a suffering one suffering from disease, to make well, heal, restore to health, and to make whole. So the concordances, the dictionaries of these words, commentaries all reflect that it is an all-inclusive word that pertains to every part of our life. I thank God for that. Of course, it started with salvation because that was the most immediate and most important need that we have is in our spirits, for our spirits to be born again. And of course, salvation started there, but everything works from the inside of your spirit outward. Now, God didn't just say, all right, now the rest of it, that's your standard equipment. Everything else is optional. In other words, either or. No, thank God that Jesus covered it all. It is a complete work of salvation, a complete work of redemption, meaning that it covers every part of our life. Spirit, soul, that would be your mind, will, and emotions. Psalm 23 says, David said, He restores my soul daily. Thank God for soul restoration on a daily basis sometimes. So you won't be oppressed in your mind, depressed. All those other things are included there. It means also salvation for the physical body. If you're in sickness or disease or you have something missing or broken in your life that needs to be repaired, then salvation would include and does include our physical needs in our physical body. It would also include finances. It would also include your family, relationships. All those other things are included in our salvation. Now, these are always supernatural. They may not always be spectacular. Sometimes they're not always immediately, particularly when you get into the financial realm or relationships, because God has to work through people and work on people. And sometimes those people are us. So He has to work those things inside of us in order to change that situation. But let me tell you something, as long as you're mixing faith with the gospel, you're believing for it, that power is activated in your life to fix it. Whether it's immediately, sometimes it is immediate, sometimes it is spectacular, but the power is always supernatural and always has the power to change a life in the positive direction, okay? Now, we've been looking at some other scriptures in the New Testament where Jesus was ministering, and those words, sozo or soteria, save or salvation, are translated to other words in other needs other than just what we would call the initial salvation experience or the new birth. It includes everything, and Jesus came to demonstrate that power of salvation would include any and every area of our life. All right, look back over to Mark's Gospel, chapter 5. Mark, the 5th chapter. Here's actually a couple of different incidences here that we're talking about intertwined together where Jesus brought about salvation unto them, and there was some other needs involved here. Now we're going to start in verse number 21. It says, "Now when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet." And verse 23 says, "And begged him earnestly, saying, My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live." Now that word healed there, when he says, "Come and lay your hands on her that she may be healed and she will live," that word healed there, again, is the word sozo, which is translated many times save, to save, or other things. But notice here it's translated healed. Again, this man needed salvation for his daughter, who was lying at the point of death at that time when he had left. She went on to die, and we'll get to that in just a minute. I'll just tell you the rest of the story in just a minute. But notice that salvation occurred to a physical body that was ravaged by sickness and disease. It was a need, and Jesus fixed it. Jesus has the power to save us in whatever need that we have. We don't have to choose either or. It's all inclusive. No optional equipment here. It's all standard equipment. All of it is in salvation. Now, of course, there was an incident when we'll get back to the woman with the issue of blood, but it goes on toward the end of that chapter, verses 35 and following, and tells the rest of that story, that when as they were going, there's some that came from Jairus' house and said, "Don't trouble the teacher any further, because your daughter is now dead." So it went from bad to worse. But we can't be moved by what we see, even though that's hard sometimes. And there's opportunities when things get worse to get into fear. In fact, Jesus addressed him when he heard those words coming out of those people coming from Jairus' house, the bad news. Jesus addressed that to him and said, "Do not fear, only believe." In other words, just keep on believing what you're believing right here. Don't turn back. Don't withdraw your faith. It's not time to withdraw your faith when you hear bad news or worse news. When things get worse, when things appear to be going down, that's not the time to withdraw our faith. That's the time to press on in and not allow fear to get a hold of us, because the salvation was in Jesus right there. So, of course, Jairus kept walking. They went to the house. They got there. There was a tumult. A tumult means there was a lot of carrying on going on. There was a lot of noise and a lot of grief and sorrow going on. And I think these were professional tumulters or something like that, I think is what I understand. But anyway, they got in there, and Jesus, of course, had to run all those people out. He said, this girl is not dead, she's sleeping. And they began to ridicule him and scorn him because of what he said there. They knew that she was dead, and he said, "She's not dead, she's sleeping." And they were probably, accusing him of being cold and incompassionate and all those things. But he was there to change the situation, to bring salvation to that house. Well, they went in there, and of course, with the father and the mother and James and Peter, I believe, maybe John, there were some other disciples, a small inner circle of disciples there. They went in there, and Jesus, of course, raised this girl up from the dead. So there was salvation brought to that house. First of all, Jairus wanted the daughter healed, but then she died of that sickness, but Jesus raised her up. And that's salvation right there. That's what he was talking about. Now, the other incident we were talking about here in Mark chapter 5 was the woman with the issue of blood. And we're going to go back now. This happened right in the middle of them going to Jairus' house. So we're going to pick it up in verse number 25. It says, "Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years, and had suffered many things from many physicians, and she had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, 'If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well.'" Now again, what do you think that word well is? Well, it's the Greek word sozo, translated save at other times. So what was her condition? It was, again, a physical condition. She had had a physical condition, an issue of blood, for 12 years. She had been to the doctors, all the specialists at that time, all the different medical technology that they had. She had spent all that she had, and at the end she was no better but growing worse. In other words, she was in a helpless, hopeless situation as far as the natural goes. Now, that doesn't mean that doctors, medical science cannot help us. But salvation really comes from the Lord. There is help in the natural realm, but there's not necessarily salvation in the natural realm. And so what she had tried for 12 years did her no good and left her broke at the end. So she was in a growing worse situation. She heard about Jesus, what had been happening in His ministry, what He had been teaching and preaching, which we're going to get to in a couple of days, a day or two. And notice that that sparked faith and hope inside of her. So she began to say, if I can just, when He comes to town, if I can just touch the hem of His garment, I shall be made well. And that's the word sozo. In other words, there's salvation for my body. I see that. There's hope for salvation in my condition. Even though man cannot do anything about it, Jesus can do something about it. Now, verse 29 goes on to say, immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in Himself that power had gone out of Him, turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? But His disciples said to Him, you see the multitude thronging you, and you say, who touched me? And He looked around to see her who had done this thing, but the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before Him and told Him the whole truth. And He said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Again, there's that word sozo again, or save. So again, that salvation came to her physical body. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. So notice again that there was salvation for the physical body. In a helpless, hopeless situation here, there was salvation through Jesus for her condition. Now notice that He attributed that to her faith. Now, of course, we know the power went out of Him. The power of God for salvation went out of Jesus into her body. But it was her faith that activated that power in her life to make her well or to save her out of her condition. Man, that's good news. That's good news for whatever condition you're facing today. You may be in a hopeless, helpless situation, just like this one, maybe growing worse. But let me tell you, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus, our faith, our trust in Him for salvation, and begin to mix our faith with that gospel, and it produces the power of God for salvation in our life. Well, join us again tomorrow. We're going to get into some more exciting things from the Word. It's going to help you grow in faith and bring salvation to your house. We'll see you tomorrow.